Join me, Harriet Gould, for the Lab Matters podcast to hear fascinating stories every week from the inspiring people behind the science. In this episode of Lab Matters with me, Harriet Gould, Alastair Gardner talks magnesium bombs, working in China, and being the James Herriot of the chemical export world. Today I am joined by Alastair Gardner. Alastair is head of trade and investment for chemicals at the Department for Business and Trade, a government official from His Majesty's government. Alastair, welcome to Lab Matters. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a
Thank you for having me.
great pleasure. So nobody really wakes up and rolls out of bed and then ends up at the Department for Business and Trade. So let's take a little look back at all the different things you did before you ended up there. This is a little trip down memory lane. Hopefully you've had enough time to remember where you went to school.
Yes, yeah. Well, I was brought up just outside Glasgow, in the biggest village in Scotland, actually called Cambuslang. And I went to a comprehensive school, local comprehensive called Cathkin High School, which is still there, but no longer the same building that I went to. It was demolished and a new school was built a few years back. But yeah, so educated at my local, as I say, my local comprehensive.
Hmm. You say the biggest village in Glasgow. It's the biggest village now as well as then, or?
Um, they keep changing the borders, but the claim to fame was that as it had no town hall, it was a village, and population wise, it was more than any other village in Scotland. So it was the biggest village in Scotland.
Did it have a
Um,
village hall at least?
it had and probably has an institute, which was built by the miners or built by the miners' welfare or something.
Hmm.
It was a steel mining town originally. Hosted the Hoover factory in the UK. And then, like a lot of places, the mines went, the steelworks went. Um, I suppose it suffered a bit of decline, like everywhere else did, but is now firmly ensconced in Glasgow's commuter belt.
Mm, excellent. So when you were there, did you have any inkling towards science? Because your primary science was chemistry, and that developed.
It, it,
When do you think that started?
it God, I'm aging myself now, but they were just starting to bring the oil out of the North Sea when I went to primary school, sort of mid seventies. Geez. Um, so I wouldn't say I was pushed towards science. Um, I didn't have an artistic bone in my body. Um, I found that I enjoyed science. And but the other thing about and in those days, when you did what at that time were called your O grades, it was very broad based. You couldn't go down a science route or a humanities route. You really had to do quite a broad base. So English, maths were compulsory. I think you had to do a language at that time. So I did French, and then I did uh, was it chemistry, physics, and then engineering, science, and technical drawing, which I loved. Technical drawing, especially, do it actually with pen and paper, drawing castings and so on and so forth. Maybe that was my latent artistic side, but it never went down the art way. Um, and then other things like geography and so on. Um, and I kind of get interested in things like engineering. But when push came to shove, I didn't actually know what kind of engineer I wanted to be. There was so many, chemical engineer, mechanical, etc., etc. And I had a couple of fabulous science teachers. There was Ian Smith and a guy called Bob Orr. Ian was head of chemistry, and Bob was head of physics. And they were the ones that kind of inspired me to go down the pure science route. And I enjoyed chemistry more than physics. It was as simple as that. As you say, I didn't wake up the day I went to secondary school and said, I want to be a chemist. I think it was just having a knack for something and having an inspirational mentor that kind of sent me down the chemistry route.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you remember anything in particular that either of them said?
it wasn't so much what they said, it was the way they brought the subjects across. Um, we had an incident when I was in my final year. In Scotland, you have hires is what determines whether you get into university or not. Um, and then they had at the time something that was called the Certificate of 6 Year Studies. And because I was unsure, and this, to be honest, this has been the story of my life, because I was unsure what I wanted to do, I stayed on and did my 6 year, where um, I did chemistry and physics. I did something else. I can't remember what I did, but I definitely did chemistry and physics at 6 year, and a lot of that was project based. Anyway, my 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 chemistry project, my physics project involved optics, and my chemistry project involved it was mass spectrometry. So I made stuff, took it into the university, got the mass spectrum done, and then we took these mass spectra back and fed the data into a BBC microcomputer and tried to get the BBC microcomputer to identify what the fragments were, which is obviously done these days on a bench. But there was only one BBC microcomputer in the entire school, and I used to tie it up for weeks on end. um, but anyway, I won a prize for that at Glasgow Caledonian, well, what is now Glasgow Caledonian University. I won a prize for the best 6 year chemistry project, and that's probably what got me on the road. All the work we did at Strathclyde University, so that's where I ended up
Hmm.
going to uni.
And
But as
that
I
was
say, it
the
was more
incident. That was the incident that you.
it was the encouragement that they gave you, know, and 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 the kind of almost like the understanding. We had an example, I think, probably one Friday afternoon where we decided we were going to make a smoke bomb out of magnesium. So we went into one of the labs with some powdered magnesium and one of these 12-volt power packs, and nearly set fire to the school. Um, and after it was done and punishment had been sort of meted out, Mr. Orr, the physics teacher in whose classroom we had nearly destroyed, took us to one side and more or less showed us how to do it properly.
If you really want to make a smoke bomb, you do
If
it
you
like
really
this.
want to make a smoke, exactly. But it was that kind of, these days you'd have been drummed out, you'd have been on
Mm.
a suspension or whatever they call it these days. But there was that kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm looking at it through rose tinted eyes, but I really felt kind of encouraged
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
do. And as I say, chemistry was what I was good at, so that's what I went and did.
Hmm.
Uh,
And then it was
and
so that was it was an obvious choice then when you went on to university, which was
it
into
was, and it became more obvious because again, my first year at university was we did chemistry, physics, and maths, and then we did chemistry and maths in second year, and it became brutally obvious into my first year that maths and physics were not for me. Um, so I'm quite glad I didn't go down the physics route because it's all very well do school, the physics that you get into at university was almost, well, I found it almost impossible. I don't know how I scraped through. So yeah, serendipitously, I got a degree in chemistry rather than dropped out in my first year of a physics degree.
Very well done. Very well done. Um, and I want to carry on a bit. If there's any, you can say anything more about the education aspect of it, but it was quite soon after you left the world of education that began on the trajectory that's taken you
Yeah.
to where you are now. But quite interestingly, I'm just checking I'm not skipping any steps. Okay, no. You did start in this country, but it wasn't that long before you went off to China. Um, and but the thing that I was looking at with this it was this printing plate company that I found quite interesting, and I just wondered if you could talk me through the transition from graduating to into work, and then
Yeah.
how on earth you ended up in this printing plate company in China.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so like a lot of people, I, I, I milk rounded my way to a job. Um, for those younger listeners, the milk round was essentially loads of companies came to the university, gave you a pitch, um, um, you had a chat with them, you applied for a job. I also applied for a couple of things that I'd seen advertised, one of which was a research scientist with a company in Leeds. Applied for that, was successful, got the job, and found out that I was working for DuPont. There was nothing in the job advert to indicate that I was going to be working as a research scientist for one of the sort of major chemical multinationals in the world. I think it's indicative sometimes of the way the industry works that you're not advertising the company, you're advertising a job. But anyway, I started. I started at the bench. I was making emulsion polymers, so taking styrenes and polymethyl methacrylates and so on and so on, and making emulsion polymers to be used in coating formulations. Most plates at that time were UV imaged. The idea that was that this one was going to be thermal, so you're going to use IR lasers instead of UV light. Um, so we had to play around with it. I did a couple of years there at that job. Um, got my one and only patent citation. But then I was asked to move, and again, it was the person who had taken me on at DuPont had been moved over onto the production side. And about 6 months after he moved into production, he came and had a chat with me and said that he was looking for a kind of troubleshooting team for the manufacturing area. Um, and I sort of had no experience at all in manufacturing. And he said, that's exactly what we're looking for, because you won't know what's right and you won't know what's wrong. And so there was a team of us that had never been in the sort of manufacturing arena, got seconded into this team. And then I ended up doing a lot of kind of process and product development work, commissioned production lines and so on. And it was actually as a result of that commissioning work that I first got sent to China, because we'd done a technology transfer project. So we had, oh gosh, a group of about 20 Chinese people came to Leeds, and we kind of showed them around and kind of let them play in one of our pilot production lines. And then everything went quiet for about a year. And then I get called in, and my boss at the time, Nick, said, okay, they're building that line in China. We're going to need you're going to need a commissioning team. Do you fancy it? So Nick headed up the team. And Nick and I we ended up interviewing for people at production operatives and QC technicians to take across to China with us. So I went for a week. where we met the team and had a walk round and so on and so forth. Then there was another 6 months where nothing happened. And then we went back for 3 weeks initially. And 4 months later, I came home because everything, I mean, it's a hell of a long story, but things don't happen. Even in the UK, things don't happen as quickly as you hope. But essentially, what should have been a 3 week job turned into a 4 month job, during which time the Chinese company asked me, did I fancy coming and working for them? And I thought, you know what? Why not? You know,
Why not?
when is anybody else going to say, do you fancy coming and working in China for a couple of years? And I thought, if you don't do it, if you do it, you might regret it. If you don't do it, you definitely will.
Yeah,
So
good, good
that's
policy,
kind of
good,
what happened.
good philosophy. And how was it? I mean, quite a culture shock for a start.
Um, it was, but I went into it. I went into it with a completely open mind.
Mm.
So, for example, the first day we arrived, um, bearing in mind as well that this wasn't in Beijing or Shanghai. This was in a city called Zhengzhou, which is in central. I mean, it's when you go there. I was there last year. It's as you can imagine, it's absolutely fabulous modern city now. 25, 20, 30 years ago when I was, God's sake, 30 years ago anyway, when I was there, I met some people who kind of three or 4 years before I went there, half the city didn't have electricity. 10 years after I left, it had a 5 line metro system and was at the heart of the Chinese high-speed rail network. So the changes that have happened. But when I went, it was a provincial capital. Um, there was very few Western comforts, if you like. There was a Hard Rock Cafe in Beijing and Shanghai. I think there was a McDonald's in Tiananmen Square and so on, but there were very few what you might call Western comforts at that time. So when we arrived, the company picked us up from the airport. It was nearly lunchtime, and they said, "Where would you like to go for lunch?" And I said, "I don't know. I've never been for lunch here. Where would you guys go for lunch?" So they took us to the restaurant where they would normally go. And then they said, "What would you like to eat?" I said, "I haven't a clue." And so what we said was, "Look, you guys order whatever whatever you want to order." And I said, "I promise you," I said, "I will try everything that you put in front of me.
Brilliant.
But I said, I reserve the right. I am not going to tell you that I like something just to be polite." So I said, "If I don't like it," because I said, I don't, So that was the way we went. And as I say, for about 3 years, everywhere I went, it was, "I don't know, what would you eat?" And it was a real eye opener. To be fair, the only time that I ever had what I would call cold sweat food poisoning was from a pizza in a Holiday Inn.
Oh, well, there we go.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, it was, I just thought there's no point in going to a place with the view, "Oh my God, it's China. I'm not going to enjoy this." And I loved it. I'm not saying I loved every minute of it, because nobody loves every minute of anything. But as an experience, it was phenomenal.
Mm.
Um, Made some fabulous friends, met my wife. Um, yeah, yeah, I'd go back tomorrow.
Mm.
Especially now that the kids are up and away, I would seriously go back tomorrow. It's a fabulous country, fabulous culture.
Brilliant. How nice. Why did you come back?
Um, there was two reasons. One was a lack of knowledge. So my contract had come to an end, and at the time I didn't want to renew it. I'd had a few issues with the company. They were, it always comes down to money, but I was supposed to be getting paid in dollars, and occasionally the dollars wouldn't arrive, so they'd sort of hand me a wad of renminbi, which is handy for spending. But as I explained to them, I said, I still have costs back home. So there was that side of it. There was the kind of stress of knowing whether or not there was going to be anything in your bank account. Um, And to be fair, my bank were absolutely fabulous about it. Again, good old days when your dad knew the bank manager type of thing. Um, and they were absolutely incredible about it. Um, but things weren't working at the company. I was trying to get something going with an American friend of mine. We were wanting to, he was working with another American on projects to stabilize the banks of the Yellow River so that when the Yellow River floods, the dikes didn't wash away. So the Chinese were looking at trees and we were trying to persuade them to look at grass. Um, that wasn't paying any money. Um, my sister was getting married. So, of course, there was a bit of a family obligation to come back. So we came back for my sister's wedding. Um, and then when I went to get, because at that time I needed another visa, and I went to get another visa in Edinburgh, and the Chinese consulate pointed out that my work permit was no longer valid, and neither was my residence permit because I wasn't working for this company, and so I wasn't given the visa to go back. And I thought, oh, gold, I better try and better try and find something. So that was partly how I ended up. I'm not saying I could have still been there now, but as I say, I had to come back for various family reasons, and I didn't make the right preparations. I could have had a work permit because as with all things China, if you know the right people, and we were fortunate that my wife's sister knew somebody in the Public Security Bureau. We probably could have sorted out the documentation before I came home, but I didn't realise I needed to.
Mm-hmm. And
And
while you were there, did you learn to speak any? Well, I mean, there are seven, I think there are seven language groups in China. But did you learn any of them?
um, I I picked it up. I didn't learn it. I, I found out fairly quickly that in China, if you can tell a taxi driver where you want to go rather than showing him a business card, you'll probably get there for half the cost. And there's a
Okay.
well, I'll give you an example. We met when we were there. Um, there was a couple come in one night. We used to go, Friday nights was the Holiday Inn happy hour. So we would go there to see who'd flown in for the weekend, have a few beers, and then go out for a meal. And one night there was a couple were there. We got chatting. It turned out that they were teachers originally. Well, they were Australian. They were teaching in one of the local schools. Um, and obviously, as teachers, they were complaining about the prices in the Holiday Inn. So we said, "Oh, there's a local bar we go to. Um, Next time you're coming out," we gave them the address of the place. Come there. So the next Friday, we all met in there, and this couple arrived, and they said, "God, where is this place?" And apparently, they'd spent £3 in a taxi, where 50 pence was the standard fare type of thing. So at the end of the night, we decided we're going to go for something to eat. We'll go for a bowl of noodles. And we walked out the bar, turned left, and 100 yards later, this Australian lad turned around and he went, "That's our school." And they hadn't realised that. So the taxi driver had picked them up outside the school. They'd given them a card. And rather than the taxi driver going, "It's just round the corner," they'd taken them on a tour of the city. And it was
Oh dear.
salutary. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, don't get me wrong, these things happen everywhere. It's happened to me in Cardiff in the past. I was down for the rugby, got to Cardiff station, went to the taxi rank, and "Can you take me to whatever hotel it was?" And the guy gave me an odd look and set off. And about 10 minutes later, we arrived at this hotel, which, as it turned out, was about a 2 minute walk or 5 minute walk from the station. So, it can happen everywhere. But I did learn Chinese. I I picked up a lot. Obviously, the company, my wife's Chinese, her family were Chinese, so I picked up bits. I still understand Chinese. but I can't speak it anymore, if you understand what I mean. It's the processing time takes too long.
Mm.
By the time I've worked out a reply, the conversation's moved on.
Mhm.
But I still can understand Chinese and can get the gist of conversations.
Mm.
Um,
Great
and
skill.
it is well, it is, but it's. I think the other thing is it's. I think being in a place and being embedded in it made it so much easier. And actually, once you get, and where I was in China as well, they always talk about the tonality of the Chinese language when you speak it. Well, where I was in Henan province in central China, their dialect is quite flat. So you don't have the same issues of tone because for me it was imperceptible. And so when I learned it, and actually I was at a dinner one night in, I think it was Tianjin, and I was having this stilted conversation with somebody, and he actually said to me that I spoke Henanhua, which is the local dialect, and I was like, grief. But I think it's a bit like, do you know when you see footballers and they come to the UK and they get interviewed on Match of the Day or whatever, and you can hear the Manchester accent through the whatever, from
Yeah,
whatever nation they come from. I think it was just that
delightful.
more than anything.
I find it adorable. Those crossover accents, one of my favorite things.
Yeah,
So, right now, there's so much what we've still got to talk about, and there's less time than I need for it all. Um, there are a couple of things that we're just going to have to maybe use this cosmetics cluster element. We might have to leave that. Let's talk about this trade business in government because I've heard you speak privately to me before about this in such a passionate way and how there are so many ways that this department actually can help in really practical ways and sort of things that they do and that you oversee. It would be just fun to understand how you found it when you first started working in government and
yeah.
how
Okay.
you,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
I didn't actually start working in government till 2018 when I joined the sector team at the Department for International Trade. For a number of years before that, I was an international trade advisor with DIT, as it was at the time, Department for International Trade, and its predecessors, UK Trade and Investment and whatever. Um, and that was partly boring. It's partly to do with the work permit thing, where I didn't know what I needed. And when I came back from China, I started with CBBC, the China Britain Business Council, because I really wanted to help companies not overcome, but not come to the hurdles that I'd come to. Um, so I did that for a few years, working in the Northeast with companies that were interested in China. But I was getting further away from my roots in industry. There was a lot of service sector companies, um, and I wasn't really speaking to the manufacturers or chemical companies. I was finding it was lawyers, it was accountants, and a lot of times they were actually wanting to get information out of me that they could then sell to their clients, frankly. So that was a bit frustrating. And then I found out, because I worked closely with UKTI in the Northeast, I found out that the Yorkshire region was looking for an ITA, a sector specialist international trade advisor. I must admit, I have managed to collect some of the longest job titles in the world in my career. But essentially, the job of the international trade advisor is to go is to meet with companies to identify their exporting or international trade needs, diagnose solutions. Do you need an agent in China? Do you need what? And then work out ways to help them achieve those. Um, so I met. Well, I started off doing only chemicals. I then gravitated into life sciences at the time when the sort of biopharma and so on and sort of were just kind of starting. So I was working with a lot of spin out companies. Um, I then became a generalist in North Yorkshire for a few years, which was fascinating uh, and really enjoyable. If you ever have to do client visits in Scarborough, Whitby, um, Thirsk, Morton, etc., and the travel, but no public, everything's done by car. Uh, I felt like I was like the James Herriot of the international trade world at that time. But met some fabulous companies, fascinating people all through that. But every time you do, you're always kind of putting something at the back of your head and at the back of your head. And through all this time, I'd maintained contact with a sector group in London. We used to have regular meetings and so on and so forth. And Ian, there was the guy that was running the team at the time, Ian, mentioned to me at one of the meetings that he'd got some funding to bring in a sector specialist to look after the trade side. So we had an investment specialist who was about attracting inward investment. He wanted to bring in somebody on the trade side. So I threw my name into the hat immediately. I was fortunate enough to be offered the role, and that was kind of next level, if you like. So that was then, well, what do we do for the chemical industry? How can we do it better? And kind of helping devise I don't want to say policy because it wasn't policy. It was more about a strategy. Mm. So what areas of the chemical industries do we support? What do we get? More importantly, what does DBT get from that relationship? And what could we be doing?
And what were the factors that informed that strategy in terms of what you supported?
It's to some extent it's the way first of all, it was recognizing that the chemical sector was a lot bigger than we originally thought it was. So when I joined, I think it's fair to say that fine and specialty chemicals were probably what we looked after most. So we would do shows like ChemSpec and CPHI. We'd have groups of UK businesses there who were in the business of making chemicals from other raw materials, and the type of places, the big reactor halls and so on and so forth. With my background in coating, I sort of pointed out that actually there was a whole downstream business that actually in some respects maybe not added more value, but was just as important as the fine chemicals businesses, and we should be looking more at those types of things. So we started with cosmetics. I'm not going to let you get away from cosmetics because no, we started with cosmetics because I'd helped start a group in Yorkshire, a personal care group. Companies like James Robinson's and Stevenson's and so on, who had an interest in personal care, cosmetics industries. That had been run by Yorkshire Chemical Focus. When Yorkshire Chemical Focus got merged into Catch, there was no place for the personal care cluster to go. So a group of us decided to spin it out as the cosmetics cluster. 3 weeks before lockdown. There's a lesson. Let's start a networking organisation and then spend the next 2 years not able to network. But because of that, we then when I joined the DBT or DIT, we started looking at cosmetics and looking at that cosmetic ingredient supply chain in the UK and the expertise around that, and actually broadening it out to not just manufacturers of chemicals, but people who are extracting natural products and so on and so forth. And so we've grown the cosmetics strand, if you like, from a brochure strand in cosmetics in 22, 23 to having 10 companies on last year. And we have a graduate scheme. So we only give companies 2 years, 3 years. If they can't make it work after 3 years, they're off. Um, what we found, and touch wood, the same thing happens next year. All three companies who graduated last year all took their own stands at the show. So that's one of the measures of success is do we retain do these companies see the value? Has our seeding helped them make that decision?
Mhm.
And then the other thing we do is we ask them, what did you get from it? So did you get sales? Did you get contacts? And we measure that as well. And so that's our kind of measure of success is where do we get what are companies doing?
Mm.
I think part of my role is identifying other parts of the sector that could benefit from the same support.
Mm. Yeah, and that sounds so efficient and so practical, and that's what it really boils down to. When you whichever way you look at it, is this something that works? Is it what people want? Is it effective?
Yeah.
Is it going
Um,
to be self-sufficient?
and we've been, yeah, we have to some extent had to let people down. We've looked at things and said, "I'm sorry, we're not doing it." I know we've done it for years, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'm sorry.
Mm. And it's not really a personal matter either, because there's nothing stopping them taking what they've learned, adjusting it, and starting something new.
Exactly. Yeah, and there are things that we've done in the past, and strangely enough, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Is could we look at that trade show or that conference or whatever it is, and could we actually turn it around on itself and say, well, actually, it is worth doing, but not the way we did it 10 years ago.
Exactly. Listen, Alistair, I think we've just about run out of time, and I feel there could be
Gosh,
enough um, enough left to say to have you back for a part two.
oh
So
God, no.
we'll see about that.
Let's see how part one goes first.
Yeah. And then so just before we end, and I'm dropping it on you, I don't know why, but sometimes I let people know before and sometimes I forget to.
Mhm.
But so don't worry if you haven't got a burning thing, but is there one thing that if you could change about the whole of the scientific sector that you would change?
Oh gosh, you will need a part two for that. Um, yeah, I mean, you and I have chatted before at various things. You know that I carry a soapbox for the chemical industry. Um, I think it would be communication. I don't think, certainly, the chemical industry has never communicated effectively to its not to its consumers more than anything. You know, it, but I think, yeah, for me, it's all about communication. Um, you can have as many skilled people in the world, but if you can't tell those skilled people what it is you want, they're
Mm,
not going to join. And I think there are bits of science that maybe do it quite effectively, but there's other parts where we don't talk about the benefits of science. We don't talk about the benefits of technology. You never see a chemist on the telly. You'd never have a series about you have physics, you have astronomy, you have nature. You never have a chemist on the telly.
which is interesting because it is the underlying physical science. I don't,
Yeah,
it binds everything and everything stems from it. So although the physicists
yeah.
might suggest differently, but
Well, the physicists
interesting.
the physicists couldn't run their experiments without the chemicals behind the equipment. And even Einstein needed a pen.
Yes, he did. What a wonderful place to end it. Alistair, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Did you enjoy that episode of Lab Matters? If you did, please do send it to the people that you think will enjoy it the most.